In the Arena with Monsignor Kieran Harrington on 710 WOR.
Welcome back to In the Arena, Brad. How you doing?
All right, how are you?
We just whipped through two amazing segments.
We're moving.
Let's do this. Our next guest, Dave Nassaney, is author and host of a radio show and a podcast, and he calls himself the caregiver's caregiver. So I'd like to welcome Dave to the show because I need to ask him exactly what he means by that.
Yeah.
Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course.
Let me tell you my story.
Please.
22 years ago, I was just a normal guy. I've got a gas station. I've been in the gas station business for 40 years. And about 22 years ago, if you can believe it, my wife complains about a headache she had, the headache of her life. I mean, she wanted me to call Dr. Kevorkian to put her out of her misery. That's how bad the headache was. 3 days. And on the fourth morning, she decided she was going to go to the hospital. But instead, by the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. The woman I loved had suffered a massive stroke, left her severely speech impaired, paralyzed on the right side. And our world turned upside down. I mean, nothing would ever be the same again.
Oh, Dave,
and in fact, the next 2 years was like a living hell for us. Charlene became angry and bitter, and she was grieving her loss, and I became angry and bitter. And to make a long story short, things got so bad that I almost left her. I wrote her a letter that said, "Charlene, why are you so mean to me? I mean, I'm just trying to be your husband, take care of your needs, but I feel no love or appreciation in return. I just don't think I can be with you anymore." And I looked at that letter and I read it over and over again. I just didn't have the heart to give it to her. But I hung in there, and a couple of years later, when she reached that phase of acceptance and the anger and the depression and all the grief was gone, she became her old self again. Our love was rekindled, and now our marriage is as strong as ever. Our faith is as strong as ever. So I realized there's so many other caregivers out there feeling lost and alone, going through so much pain and suffering. I didn't want them to hurt anymore, and I didn't want them to give up like I almost gave up. So I became Dave the Caregiver's Caregiver. I now host a popular iTunes podcast, and I'm a best-selling author of my third book. It's My Life Too, Reclaim Your Caregiver Sanity by Learning When to Say Yes and When to Say No. And I've appeared on 24 morning shows all across the country, from Washington, D.C. to Hawaii, and appeared
right in that message.
Yeah. And so this is my mission in life now, to save caregivers' lives, because 30% of them actually die before their loved ones do, and 60% become sicker than the ones they're caring for, eventually needing a caregiver of their own.
You know what? I appreciate your honesty, because I think that's a story not many people will share, because there's some shame to it. You know, how could this man, the husband, for better or for worse, decide, you know what, you've become too much for me to bear. So I just want to go ahead and say that the honesty is extremely appreciated, and your journey bringing you back to your wife and rekindling your love is inspiring. How can we support caregivers and prevent that from happening? You've written this great book. You talk about it over media platforms, but how about someone like me or someone like Brad?
Well, I take it you two guys have never been caregivers, right?
Not to that degree. I have to admit, no, not to that degree. Brad?
Not in that way, but I did go through a protracted experience with my own dad before his death that required significant care. And full disclosure, I'm also a rabbi, so there's a part of that just comes with the business. But don't imagine, because my experience in this, Dave, is that even if you've been a caregiver, no caregiver's experience is exactly the same. And all caregivers can learn from your experience. So what is the guidance you would give because eventually most of us will find ourselves in some version of this. How do we support caregivers, and how can we be better caregivers?
I like to say there's three kinds of people in the world. And I'm sorry, the gardener just happened to decide that he's going to do this. I hope you can hear me okay.
No, we're good.
Gardening waits for no man.
You're either a caregiver, you're going to become a caregiver, or you're going to need a caregiver. There's no escaping it.
Right.
Everybody is going to have caregiving touch their life at one point. And that's why I wrote my book. It's not only for caregivers. Now is the time to learn how to be a caregiver, not when tragedy strikes and you become disabled. I didn't know what I was doing. It wasn't on my resume. And, this is something that they should teach you in grade school. And so what I believe is that if you know somebody who's a caregiver, because everybody knows somebody who's a caregiver, just like everybody knows someone who has cancer, a third of the population are caregivers, get them a book. So here's what I tell caregivers. I tell them, there's 3 mistakes to avoid if you want to prevent your loved one's illness or disease from actually killing you. The first is you need to learn how to put your needs first. Now, when you go on the airplane, what do they tell you? In the event of emergency, put your oxygen mask on first before you help your loved one. We've all heard that. I mean, what an amazing metaphor for all of life. Take care of you first, not out of selfishness, out of survival. The second biggest mistake caregivers make is they don't know how to ask for help. I mean, everyone has a cell phone. For goodness sake, use it. Call your brother, call your sister, call your mother's ex-wife, call anybody to get over that silly notion that if you can't do it all by yourself, you're a failure as a caregiver. That attitude will kill you. And the third biggest mistake caregivers make is they allow people to just heap the guilt on them, like they were stacking pancakes. I mean, everyone remembers that show back in the 70s about a caregiver who was caring for his elderly father in the junk business. Remember, it was called
Sanford and Son, yes.
Sanford was notorious for guilting his son Lamont and doing all sorts of cockamamie, harebrained schemes he had no business doing, and he used undeserved guilt. It went something like this: oh, it's a big one.
That heart attack saved him each and every time, didn't it?
It was always coming and never arrived.
It never, exactly. Dave, I want to ask, you've done a lot of research on the correlation between caregivers and suicide. And obviously within the past few weeks, suicide has been a tremendous topic of conversation. And I'm afraid sometimes it's in the news and then it disappears far too early before we've had a discussion about it. Talk to us really quickly about that correlation and why it's important.
These recent suicides that we've seen, Anthony Bourdain, Kate Spade, Robin Williams, Kurt Cobain, they all shocked the world when they all died by an apparent suicide. And, we have to ask the question, whenever there's depression, we should say, is suicide far behind? So statistics show there's a higher incidence of suicides among caregivers. Nobody thinks about it because caregivers are so just quiet and minding their own business, doing their own thing, and dying, So what I hope to do is just, I know the AARP and United Hospital Fund did a study of 1,677 caregivers, found that 40 to 61% of them actually felt, and this is a quote, they felt down, they felt depressed, they felt hopeless during the last 2 weeks. And so that's why I say these 3 mistakes that I just told you can help caregivers not only stay alive, but get out of that depression, that suicidal depression that unfortunately takes many lives, not only caregivers.
Dave, quick question. You've spoken about and written about in many places the role of faith in developing and heightening your ability to be a caregiver and to help care for other caregivers. Can you talk a little bit about that faith, and then also how people who may not think of themselves as faithful or religious in any way can still integrate some of your faith-based lessons into their non-faith-based lives?
Well, Rabbi, everyone has faith in something. I mean, you're probably sitting down as I am, and we're putting our faith in that chair that is not going to break from underneath us. Whether your faith is in God or a higher power or the heavenly astronaut or in Moses, I mean, whatever it's in, we need to trust that faith that the universe has put us in a position. I mean, even the Bible says that all things work together for good to them that love the Lord. And I truly believe that if we're going through something, there's a reason for it. I think about, if I would only done this or I would only done that. I can't think that way because I love how this stroke and being a caregiver has changed me. And I wouldn't change it for $1 million. But you know what? I wouldn't go through it again for $1 billion. But I'm thankful that I went through it. And no, I wouldn't change anything. So if you're going through something, people out there who are listening, I just want you to know that God has given you what it takes to get through. And it's called grace. Now, I have the grace to go through what I'm going through. Many people say, I can't do what you're doing. I don't know. You're a saint. You're Mother Teresa. But you know what? They're going through something too. Everybody's going through something. And maybe I can't do what you're doing, but you probably can't do what I'm doing. So God makes tailor-made trials for everybody to help them strive to reach perfection on this earth. And that's the goal. That's the mission. So I'm not really a saint. I just, it's kind of easy for me. It's a new normal, and I don't think I have a problem. I don't think, you should feel sorry for me. I'm just living life like I was living it before. It's just different.
Really quickly, Dave, before we wrap up, we have 30 seconds. How are things for you now and your family?
I'm doing great. My wife's doing great. I mean, she still can't talk. We like to say that she can communicate, but she can't talk. And she uses things like Pictionary and charades, two games I hate, by the way. I still learn.
But you play.
Yeah, my idea of heaven would be a bunch of people playing charades. So this is something that I'm dealing with. She still can't walk, but she has a powered chair that goes faster than I am. It's 4-wheel drive. And we literally travel around the world. I mean, she's an overachiever. She's like Martha Stewart and Wonder Woman all wrapped into one. And she just makes us normal people look like whiners and complainers.
Oh, wow.
And my badge of honor is just being known as the husband of Charlene, and I wear that badge proudly. We're both doing great. Our faith is never stronger.
I love
and
that.
our love is
That is the perfect last word. Thank you so much, Dave. What a wonderful resource you've provided. And thoughts, prayers always with you. And thanks for sharing your story. We will be right back, everyone, with Monsignor Harrington after this break. Stay tuned.